came to an edge of the camp where the sand plain continued on toward a range of low tan mountains in the distance and probably bands of janjaweed. "Alex, we need to go back," Adan said. She had the tone of a person putting her foot down. "Unfortunately, this has been unproductive, don't you think? We are nearly dehydrated, and we don't even know where we're sleeping tonight. We'll be lucky to get a ride into town." She stopped and looked around. "If we can even find our way back to the admin tent before dark." The place was like an impossible maze, with rows of identical huts wherever we looked, and so many displaced people, thousands and thousands, many of them sick and dying. I took a deep breath, fighting off the day's frustration. "All right, let's go. You're right." We started picking our way back and had just come around a corner when I stopped again. I put a hand out to keep Adan from taking another step. "Hold up. Don't move," I said quietly. I had spotted a large man ducking out of one of the shelters. He was wearing what I'd call street clothes anywhere else. Here, they marked him as an outsider. He was huge, both tall and broad, with dark trousers, a long white dashiki, and sunglasses under a heavy brow and shaved head. I took a step back, just out of sight. It was him. I was sure it was the same bastard I'd seen at Chantilly. The tiger. The one I was chasing. "Alex, shh! That's him, Adan." "Oh my God! You're right." The man gestured to someone out of sight, and then two young boys walked out of the shelter behind him. One was nobody to me. The other wore a red and white Houston Rockets jersey. I recognized him instantly from Sierra Leone. Adan gripped my arm tightly, and she whispered, "What are you going to do?" They were walking away, but were still in plain sight. "I want you to wait 5 minutes, and then find your way back. I'll meet you." "Alex?" She opened her mouth to say more, but stopped. It was probably my eyes that told her how serious I was. Because I had realized that everything I'd been told was true. The rules I knew just didn't apply here. There was no taking him in, no transporting him back to Washington. I was going to have to kill the tiger, possibly right here in the Abu Shuk camp. I had few qualms about it either. The tiger was a murderer, and I had finally caught up with him. Chapter 91. I hung back, following the killer at a distance. It sure wasn't hard to keep him in sight. I had no specific plan. Not yet. Then I saw a shovel sitting unattended outside somebody's hut. I took it and kept moving. It was just past sunset, a time when everything looked tinted with blue, and sound carried. Maybe he heard me because he turned around. I ducked out of sight, or at least I hope so. The huts along the footpath were packed in tightly. I wedged myself into a foot-wide gap between two of them. The walls on either side were crude mud brick. They grated on my arms as I tried to push my way through and get the tiger back in sight. I had made it about halfway when one of his young thugs stepped out into the alley. He didn't move. He just shouted something in Yoruba. When I looked over my shoulder, Houston Rockets was at the other end of the alley. I could see the white of his grin, but not his eyes in the dim half-light.
"It's him!"
he called out in a high-pitched voice, almost a giggle.
"The American cop!"
Something slammed hard into the wall inside the hut. The entire hut buckled, and large chunks of dried mud fell into the alley.
"Again!"
Houston Rockets yelled. I realized what was happening. They meant to crush me in the narrow passageway. The whole wall exploded then. Bricks and debris and dirt poured down on my head and shoulders. I waded forward, took a hard swing, and struck the nearest punk with my shovel. And then I found myself face to face with the tiger. Chapter 92.
"Now you will die,"
he said to me matter-of-factly, as if the deed were a foregone conclusion. I didn't doubt that he was telling the truth. He looked incredibly calm, his eyes barely registering emotion as he reached forward and grabbed me by the arm and throat. My only thought was to hold on to the shovel and to swing it if I got the chance. He threw me back down the alley as easily as if I were a child. No, a child's doll. I landed hard on splintering wood and plaster. Something sharp sliced into my back. I registered Houston rockets blocking the other escape route. There was nowhere for me to run. The tiger came charging at me, so I swung the shovel as hard as I could, going for the bastard's knees. The shovel head connected. Not a home run, but maybe a double. The tiger buckled, but he didn't go down. Unbelievable. I'd hit him in the kneecaps, and there he stood, glowering at me.
That's all you have?
It was as though he didn't feel anything at all. So I raised the shovel again and struck his left arm. He must have been hurt, but he didn't show it, his face revealing no more emotion than a wall of slate.
Now, my turn. Can you take a punch?
Suddenly a floodlight hit my eyes. There were voices behind it. Who was there?
Nabuspa!
I heard footsteps scuffing on the dirt and the metallic rustle of guns. Suddenly, green-helmeted AU soldiers were in the alley with us, 3 of them.
Laisse-la tomber!
One of the soldiers yelled. It took a second to realize I was just as much a suspect here as the tiger. Or worse, maybe I was the only suspect. I dropped the shovel and didn't wait for any more questions. This man is wanted in the United States and Nigeria for murder. I'm a policeman.
Tais-toi!
One of the soldiers said and put his rifle right in my face. Jesus. The last thing I wanted was to have my nose broken again. Listen to me. Écoutez-moi. This was a Senegalese platoon, and my French wasn't the greatest. The scene was getting more insane and out of control by the second. He's got 2 accomplices. 2 garçons. Vous comprenez? They are all murderers. That last remark got me a punch in the gut. I doubled over, trying to catch my breath, while the tiger just stood there, mute, uttering not a word of protest. Perfectly calm, smarter than I was. And in control? I wondered. Chapter 93. They brought us both out of the alley at gunpoint and made us kneel in the dirt. A crowd had gathered, maybe a couple hundred people already. There were only 5 AU troops on the scene, barely enough to cover us and keep everyone else back a few yards. Several people were pointing at the tiger. Because he was so large, or because they knew who he was, or maybe how dangerous. Alex? Alex! I heard Adan's voice, and nothing could have sounded more welcome to me. Then I saw her push through the crowd to the front. Her eyes went wide when she spotted the tiger kneeling a few feet away from me. He saw her, too. Let me through. I'm with the Guardian. She took an ID out of her pocket, but a soldier shoved her back. She called out to me again, and she kept yelling, risking her own safety. Alex, tell them that the Guardian is doing your story. Tell them. The Guardian is here. I will write their story. But then my ears took in something else. The high-pitched whine of a vehicle traveling in reverse. Was that right? Was I hearing it correctly? Who was coming now? The crowd on one side started to stir, from the rear at first. Then people were scattering wildly, screaming or cursing. Everything was turning to chaos, even worse than it had been. I could see a black pickup truck now, backing toward us at high speed. It weaved recklessly along the very narrow street, taking out several shade canopies as it came. There were gunshots, too, possibly coming from the truck. The AU team scrambled back first, then the truck stopped, 20 yards away. Houston Rockets was in the back, shielding himself with a young girl. She was maybe 12 or 13. He had one arm around her throat. His other hand, held high over his head, was holding a grenade for everyone to see. The tiger wasted no time. He jumped up and ran for the truck. The passenger door opened for him, and he disappeared inside. I saw his huge hand come out and slap the roof hard. As the pickup raced away, the young girl was thrown from the back. Thank God for that, anyway. But as we watched in shock, She clawed the air with both arms and hit the ground with her head. Then she exploded. Houston rockets must have shoved the grenade into the girl's clothing. They had no reason to kill her. The murder was just for show. Or maybe for my eyes. Or Adan's? Chapter 94. The next morning we returned to Lagos, exhausted and with heavy hearts. Clearly this kind of insanity happened often here. How could the people bear it? Adan insisted that her family put me up for a day or so. Whatever you need, Alex. I want to get this killer as badly as you do. I've written about him enough. She had her own apartment in the city, but we drove to her parents' house on a part of Victoria Island, to a side of this fascinating megacity that I hadn't seen before. The streets here were wide and clean, with no buildings taller than 2 stories. Most of the homes sat behind yellow or pink stucco walls. Still, there was a familiar smell of fruit and flowers decaying in the air. Adan pulled up to a gate and punched in a code. "Alex," she said before we got out of her car, "I prefer to save my parents the stress and worry. I told them we've been in Abuja. They're worried about civil war." "Okay," I agreed. "Abuja it is." "Thank you. You are very kind," she whispered up close to my ear. "Oh, here they are. They'll think you're a new boyfriend. But I'll clear that up, don't worry." Everyone was coming out through the carport to the parking pad as we pulled in. I was still pondering the idea, Adan's new boyfriend. 2 boys, adorable, smiling twins in school uniforms and undone neckties appeared. They were elbowing each other to be the first to open Adan's door. There were hugs all around for Adan, and then introductions for me. I was a policeman from America who was helping her with an important story. I was not a new boyfriend. Adan had everyone laughing about that absurdity within seconds. Ha ha! What a comedienne she was. Chapter 95. I met her mother, Somadina, her father, Uchenna, her sister-in-law, Nkiru, and the nephews, James and Calvin. They couldn't have been warmer or nicer people. It seemed utterly natural to them that a complete stranger should come stay in their home for an unspecified amount of time. The house was a modest 1-story, but with lots of windows and interesting views. From the foyer I saw a walled backyard with tamarind trees and flower gardens. I could smell the hibiscus, even from inside. Adan showed me to her father's office. The walls in here, like in Adan's office at The Guardian, were covered with framed news stories. I noticed that a couple of them dealt with a gang of killer boys and the man who led them. The name Tiger wasn't used, however. "Are these all yours?" I asked, looking around. "You've been a busy girl, haven't you?" She was a little sheepish now, the first embarrassment I had seen from her. "Let's say I've never had to wonder if my father is proud of me. My mother as well." I also noticed a framed military portrait on the desk, a young soldier with Adan's features in her eyes. "Your brother?" "Kalu, yes." She went over and picked it up. Instantly there was sadness in her eyes. "He was with the engineering corps. My big brother. I adored him, Alex. You would have liked him." I wanted to ask what had happened to him, but I didn't. "I'll tell you, Alex. 2 years ago he went to Niku for a meeting at the Minister of Urban Development. There was a dinner that night, a private function at a popular restaurant. No one knows exactly what happened, but all 15 people there were found dead. They were massacred with guns and machetes." The Tiger? I wondered. And his killer boys? Was that why she had written about him? And maybe why I was here now? Was everything finally coming together? Adan set the picture down with a sigh. Then she absently ran her fingers through her braids. Once again, I couldn't help noticing how beautiful she was. Stunning, really. There was no getting around it. "That was the first time I ever heard of the Tiger. Only because I did my own digging. The official investigation by the police